recording both places, okay? For anyone who's here, again, this is, you are expected to watch this. Obviously, they're gonna have to open it to hear me say that. But, okay. I'm gonna start sharing my screen. And, all right. Okay, so, we went through a little bit about what is a species, etc., and why do some things change or not change. Okay, so let's start here. I'll just review a little bit of this. Oh, it's gonna freeze up when I try to start it for some reason. I don't know why my computer does this. It's fast everywhere else, and I have great internet. It just sometimes freaks out when I try to open or close things or save them. So, there we go. Okay. We'll make it through. Okay, so one of the key things with speciation is it happens due to a lack of gene flow between separate populations. And then through that lack of gene flow, individual groups have different environmental forces. Maybe it's a little drier on one side and they get more, there's drought that happens. Maybe there's more, maybe one of them gets a mutation that's beneficial and the other doesn't. So this is the kind of thing, but I'm going to show you how that works. The idea is that populations will evolve independently if there's no gene flow between them. All right, so it's a splitting event. I introduced these three concepts when we left on Tuesday, okay? I guess it was last week, Thursday. So we talked about the biological species concept, the concept of can organisms have viable babies. We're going to talk a little bit about the biological species concept because it's more complex than that. It's not just a can they have viable children, but will they? What is keeping them from actually mating? Then we'll discuss morphospecies and phylogenetic species. It's going to lead into phylogeny starting next week. We also will be doing a lab on phylogeny and dichotomous keys. So the lab next week, I'm going to tell everyone it's not hard. It is time consuming. Okay, so everyone who's here can know this. I will send out a reminder to everyone, please check out the lab soon. I just finished the recording for it and I'm going to be posting that by tomorrow. And but it is time consuming because it takes a little while to actually build these trees. Okay, so make sure that you actually carve out the whole 3 hours in chunks. Maybe do an hour here, an hour there, or do like sit down and just push through it. It does take a little while because there is one electronic activity that you do that is time consuming. It takes me a while to do it and I know how, so make sure that you are taking time. Okay. Biologists use all three of these concepts to identify species and identify when speciation is happening. So the biological species concept is not just that organisms cannot mate, but that there's reproductive isolation. So what does that mean? Think of what would keep you from, say, going out with somebody that you like. There's a variety of things that can prevent you, even if you wanted to mate or wanted to go out with them. What would keep you apart? So there's something called prezygotic and postzygotic isolation. Prezygotic is before fertilization happens, before sperm and egg meet. This keeps them from even going on a date, okay? The postzygotic, that is where once sperm and egg meet, that's when the problems happen, okay? So mating is prevented over here. And here, the hybrid offspring have low survival rates or cannot reproduce themselves, okay? So we'll start out with talking mostly about prezygotic isolation, because things can be prezygotically isolated without being new species, but over time this isolation can lead to speciation. One of the cons of the biological species concept is that you can't evaluate it using fossils or asexual species. Some species reproduce via just budding, and you also can't evaluate for populations that don't overlap geographically. Okay, so there's 2 species of walruses that live in northern America, Canada area. There's the eastern and the western walruses. Literally, they live on the coasts. So ones that live off the coast of Maine and areas around there, ones that live way over in on the west near Alaska. The issue is that we can't actually determine whether they are different species using just the biological species concept, because they're geographically isolated. Geographic isolation is one way the species can form, but it doesn't mean they are actually separate species. Possibly if brought together, they would recognize each other as mates. And so it's really just about the geographic isolation. We can't actually fully tell whether they have evolved to be separate species that now will not or cannot mate. Okay, so let's talk about those. So let's think how, besides geographic isolation, which is obviously one way that you can be separated, how might 2 populations be isolated from even attempting to create a hybrid? The way I like to represent this to my class is, let's think about, we all know reasons why maybe if we met someone that we wouldn't want to go on a date with them. But what could keep you from even meeting someone? What kind of activities would prevent you from meeting somebody? Maybe you would like them if you met them, but what could prevent you from even meeting someone? Let's say besides geographic isolation. So James has mentioned geographic. Distance is one thing, absolutely distance, and that's one of the major ways that species do isolate. But let's talk about what other things. Let's say you live near somebody. What could keep you from seeing them? Or even recognizing that they're out there and available for going on a date. Let's say you live in the same city. What could prevent you from meeting this person and recognizing them as a possible dating partner? So what if they work, so their parents, okay. So potentially the parents would prevent them from that. That's a kind of behavioral isolation. But let's say, what if they work night shifts and they work and you work day shifts, okay? So when you come back, they're leaving for work. And so you never see each other, but not because you don't live in the same area, but because your schedules are so different. This is one form of isolation that occurs. Now, obviously, we are all the same species for humans, but if that occurred long enough, where constantly a certain set of humans were only awake at night and a certain set of humans were only awake during the day, over time, that would isolate you, what's called temporally. Okay? Jesse has had some heartbreak over temporal isolation. So the fertile time doesn't match up. Now, most organisms are not like humans. They have a certain time of the year, often, that they are fertile, and that's it. So for instance, if these 2 species live near each other, but one of them has evolved to open in June and one of them opens in May, then species 1, their pollen will not reach species 2 because species 2 hasn't finished developing. And so this time frame, literally they are on completely different schedules. By the time this one opens, this one will have wilted. And so because of that schedule difference, they are not able to mate. Even if they were open at the same time, they may be able to crossbreed. The idea is that these schedules have been so different for so long that they have moved into very different genetic species, but this is the first step. This pre-zygotic isolation, keeping you from even meeting the person who's on the night shift because of temporal separation, okay? Other times would be, let's say the female being in heat doesn't match when the males reach their sexual peak. And so even if they were nearby each other, they wouldn't mate. So that could be true for animals too. A nocturnal animal versus a diurnal animal. All right. So this is I forgot to put this in there. This is a little representation of how temporal isolation can happen. Basically, if the pollen is not released at the same time, related species will not be able to mate with them, and this leads them further apart on the evolutionary tree. Okay. So habitat. So here's the deal. This habitat and also is one way. And when I talk about habitat, I'm not talking about geographic isolation. This is not like one side of a river, a different side of the river, one side of town, another side of town. More, this is, where is your preferred place that you meet people, okay? So this says mate, but I think the dating concept is sound here, okay? So, for instance, let's say that your preferred way to meet up with people, right, the watering hole. Your preferred way to meet up with people is to go to this really chill bar, and you hang out there with your friends, and you meet people there. And so this bar place, okay, that you would go to, or maybe there's a coffee shop you like, and sometimes you meet people at the coffee shop. But what if the person that you might end up liking never goes to that coffee shop, never visits that bar? You might never meet them even if they live in your same city. Perhaps they prefer loud nightclubs, and you hate loud nightclubs. You guys are just never going to meet when you're looking for mates. Obviously, there's other things that can bring you together, but this is the concept behind the habitat part. Not that they live in separate areas, but they prefer different habitats. And over time, this can separate them evolutionarily, okay? So anole species, these are a very common type of species. They live in close proximity to each other, but they've evolved separate tolerances to habitats. And what this means is that some of them, so this one, a non-heliothermic one, it hangs out on the trees. And this one hangs out in the forest edge, and this one hangs out in this open habitat. And note that they have different average body temperatures. And so this one tolerates warm temperatures better. This one tolerates medium temperatures. This one tolerates cool temperatures. So this guy, the heliothermic one on the forest edge, is never going to wander way out into the field. It's too warm. He's never going to wander deep in the forest. It's too cold. So he's only going to find other animals that live on the edge of the forest. And that's a habitat separation. Again, note this is not geographic. There's no barrier to them walking there. This is not even that far of a distance. It's the fact that they would prefer to mate in this forest edge or inside the forest or an open habitat. And because they don't venture further to find mates, then they don't meet the other anoles. So this is a concept, again, that we can apply to even humans, that you don't prefer to go to this nightclub, and therefore you don't meet people who go to nightclubs. And that can prevent you from finding a dating partner. So here's a habitat isolation one. This one prefers to mate on the land. This one prefers to mate in the water. And because neither one of them is going to venture away from their preferred habitat, they don't mate, even if they could. All right, so behavioral. This one is one of the ones that we probably relate most to. Now, I know mating rituals sort of thing, but the concept here is that Certain people have behaviors that we don't like. Maybe someone enjoys a dry sense of humor, and another person is really turned off by that. One person likes a big nerd who likes to watch comic book movies and play video games. Someone else is a very outside people. Jesse asks if those in habitat isolation can meet due to natural events like floods. The answer is sometimes, but usually what it is that if there's something like a flood, this is not mating time. This is a crisis that occasionally could cause some gene flow between these, but would not long-term make them mate. Okay, so potentially, yes, it could cause a gene flow event, but it probably would not be long-term because of how they've evolved. Okay. Behavioral, again, is one of those, you're turned off by something that someone else does, and that leads you to not date them. Not because necessarily you think that they're awful or mean. Awful and mean is, something that even organisms in the animal department don't appreciate. But something like, basically, don't recognize them as a mate. So if there's someone that just you've always thought of as a sister, and then friend zoned, you think of them as a sister, you would never consider them as a possible dating partner, then that cuts that off. That is behavioral isolation, because you've those behaviors that they have never make you consider them as a potential dating partner. Yeah, thinking of them as a family member. I've definitely had people I was crushing on tell me that I was like a little sister to them. So, I'm sure many of you have had the same experience. Obviously, I've been married for a while, so you just have to find someone who doesn't do that to you. Okay. So this is a funny gif of a bird of paradise, okay? Obviously, look at his weird stuff here, okay? So this is a type of bird of paradise. He has these deep black things and these bright blue patches on his face. And here it creates a striking contrast. Now, they're pretty actually closely related to this other bird. This is a different kind of bird of paradise. But look at the difference in coloration. Again, they're in the same genus. Yeah, it's your moonwalk bird, exactly. Angela wrote about this bird when we were talking about that. So this is a form of behavioral isolation, even if technically, if you took sperm from one of these birds and put it into a female bird, they could make viable offspring. They don't recognize each other as mates. Therefore, that qualifies them as different species, because they would never consider this bird to be of their same species. They would never be attracted by the mating potential of one of them, because it's so different, too different for them to consider mating with the other species. And this leads them further apart, and eventually they would not be able to create viable offspring, okay? But at this point, they're not even trying. This is still pre-zygotic, okay? All right. So this is more of the behavioral isolation. This bird doesn't like country music, and so she would never consider this bluebird as her mate. Obviously, it's a little bit different with animals, but that's the concept. You can be turned off by someone's behavior, even if they would make a good partner. You would not consider them as a viable mate. All right. So the next few are going to be barrier-based, but in gametes. Okay, so prezygotic means that a zygote is not formed. So gametic can actually mean where the individual gametes cannot form a zygote. So perhaps organisms will mate, that they don't have the behavioral isolation, but genetically they are too different to even form a zygote. So this is a more complex form of prezygotic isolation, because mating can happen. Mating is not prevented, but at the same time, they are unable to mate and produce any offspring at all, okay? So this is true for sea urchins. Now, sea urchins don't make like normal animals do, in the sense that they don't even have the normal kinds of organs that you'd consider to be mating organs. Instead, the male will release sperm and females release eggs. Okay, yeah, they just spew it in the water. They are not choosing their mates at all. This is just well, here's a bunch of sperm in the water, here's a bunch of eggs in the water. It's super gross. If you ever go snorkeling, just try not to think about this, okay? Jesse, stop it. Okay, it's disgusting. Coral does the same thing, yes. A lot of, and even fish do this. So fish will choose their mates sometimes, but the female lays their eggs, and then the male will put sperm on top of them. There is, and sometimes this means that other sperm could get to the eggs as well. Okay, so protein in sea urchin sperm determines whether the sperm can penetrate the eggs. And so if the proteins don't match, no matter how much sperm from a different species is in the ocean, only the sperm from their species will penetrate. This is a form of evolutionary, this is an evolutionary adaptation in the sense that it's possible that there are other genetic issues that would prevent hybrids from doing well. So having this specific protein helps them to have strong children and not have the other sperm break in, okay? Oh, the ocean is completely full of deviants. Wait until we get to some of the behavioral stuff that they do. The ocean is ridiculous. Mostly because there's a lot of very far removed from us organisms that we wouldn't think of as normal, okay? If you've ever eaten sea urchins, the actual part that you eat, that creamy orange stuff, is actually the gonads of the sea urchin, the part that produces eggs and sperm. Strange, but apparently delicious. Now everyone is... Oh, if you stepped on one of these, well, this is one of their defenses, obviously. Okay. The next one is sort of a weird one, too. There is the mechanical issue. Now, I mentioned that so all dogs are the same species. But in some dog species, there is a mechanical issue. Right, we talked about the Chihuahua and the Great Dane. A Great Dane Great Dane male likely could not mate with a Chihuahua female just due to their size difference. Similarly, a Chihuahua wouldn't be able to carry Great Dane children to term due to the small size of the Chihuahua. You'd be able to do it the other way around, but likely the poor puppies that were born wouldn't be able to nurse on the Great Dane just due to the size. So this would not be ideal. Don't mate those two dogs. This happens in the wild too. If one of the organisms has gotten too large, or their genital shape has changed to not work for another organism, then they won't mate, even if they recognize each other as mates, okay? So these two are two different types of lemurs. They're reasonably closely related, but basically the shape of the penis of one of these will not be able to penetrate the female due to basically shape and location. And therefore, even if they were attracted to each other, they could not properly have sex or get the sperm to the egg. Again, if this was an artificial insemination issue, you took the sperm from one and you put it in the other, potentially they'd be able to have viable children. But they have deviated so much in size and shape that that mating would not be successful, and this keeps the sperm from getting to the egg. All right, so the last two, again, were a little bit mechanical, not so much of a don't recognize each other as mates, but cannot mate, or the egg and sperm cannot form a zygote. So what if two different species do mate and form a zygote? Like the sperm and egg are able to interact, and now you have a zygote. Well, we're going to move away from the humans now because this is no longer an issue for humans, because all humans can mate and create viable zygotes unless there's actually a genetic issue that prevents that, okay? But that's not a population-wide thing. So, but after successful egg fertilization, what could prevent the development of a viable hybrid population? So there's a couple types of post-zygotic isolation. So one of them is hybrid viability. Basically, sometimes it means that so if chromosomes have changed significantly, then one of them has a certain set of chromosomes that doesn't match the others properly. This means that the hybrids will either be weak or very few will make it to birth. Spontaneously, because of the genetic issues, the babies will not survive. Or there's major defects, and they're quickly picked up via natural selection. So these two toads, now they look really different, but toads don't really care who they mate with. So when they overlap, these two toads will mate. The problem is that even they form zygotes, almost all of the organisms, all of their fertilized eggs will eventually die. Okay? No tadpoles will survive. All of them spontaneously abort due to chromosomal mismatch, which means that this female will lay eggs, but they are essentially wasted in the sense that if they mate with each other, then you actually are you reduce the population basically via just not being able to form a hybrid offspring, or their hybrid offspring, when formed, will die quickly. Second one is hybrid fertility. So who here has heard of a liger or a tigon? Maybe from Napoleon Dynamite. So Ariana's heard of it. What do you know about ligers and tigons? They're sterile. And they're huge. If you've ever seen, I should look up a picture of a liger. They're really crazy looking. Let me see if I can find one off screen here. Ligers are gigantic. Let me show you an image here of a liger. Okay. They're bigger than normal. So let's show you a picture of a person standing next to it. Okay. So they're something like 2/3 the size of an actual, like 1.5 times the size of a regular tiger. They're gigantic. Okay? Yeah, these things are monsters. This is due to something called hybrid vigor. Sometimes when these two form together, the good parts to go together and they get really strong. The thing is that this liger, even though it's huge and strong, it does not have working reproductive parts. Its sperm and eggs are non-viable for other hybrids and for organisms of either species. They cannot form babies. And therefore, when a lion and tiger, again, lions and tigers don't overlap. This is due to artificial insemination, okay? But when lions and tigers actually breed, they don't actually create organism. They don't create any babies that could be turned into a hybrid population in itself. That it's a dead end evolutionarily. Okay, and so mules are common pack animals. They're very strong. They're larger than horses and donkeys. It's a horse and donkey combined. But mules, their eggs and sperm do not form properly. And so a mule is a good pack animal, but can never be bred itself to create better mules. You can only breed good horses and good donkeys together to create good mules. And horses and donkeys will not choose to breed with each other. So they're already isolated pre-zygotically. If we force that through insemination, they are different enough that the hybrid will be sterile. All right, so here is all of the reproductive isolation pieces here, okay? So temporal, habitat, behavioral, gametic, mechanical, oh, Great Dane and Chihuahua. Hybrid viability, hybrid sterility, okay? So look at all these pieces. It does give you some examples, okay? It's like ring-necked doves and rock doves that have less than 6% of eggs that hatch, and those are sickly, okay? All right. Yes, Jesse. You had a question. Sorry. I missed it because I was busy talking. No, you're okay? Okay, it's fine. I just want to make sure I didn't miss something. So the next way to tell if two organisms are different is through morphospecies concept. And the morphospecies concept is useful because you can use fossils as well. So this helps with building phylogenetic trees. Additionally, it can be used for two organisms that are separated in space, but we want to see if they are separated with physical traits, okay? So size, shape, other morphological features. This is not talking about whether or not they could mate, but talking about whether or not they have traits that are different enough. Remember that Darwin wasn't trying to breed these finches he found together. He wasn't actually observing them and saying, okay, does this one mate with this one? More what he was doing was he was observing the morphological features of these birds and saying, you know what, all of these birds have this short beak. None of them have a variation that leads to this long beak that's in this completely different species. And when he took specimens of them to people who knew about them, they were like, yeah, those are clearly different species because of the morphospecies concept. It can be widely applied. And you don't have to know how much crossover there is because even if there is a small amount of gene flow between hybrid populations, between populations to make a hybrid population, the idea is that you can still identify them as different species if the morphology is different enough, okay? It's applicable to sexual, asexual, fossil species, something that the biological species concept struggles with because it's all about mating and viability. Since you don't have to know that for the morphospecies concept to work, it is beneficial to use in concert with the biological species concept. So, for instance, so we see the human and the bat. Humans and bats have similar morphologies of their hands, but no matter how flabby a human's arm gets, it never resembles a bat wing. And no matter how short and stubby a bat's wings get, it never resembles a human arm. There is a clear morphological difference between them. And we don't have to test whether or not they can mate to know that. Similarly, if you have two species who look very similar to each other, but one of them has a body size that's much smaller, and none of the organisms in this group have a body size that's even close to species 2, we could say, okay, this one's much smaller, this one's much larger, and there's no in-between or range of species in any of these that kind of match each other. This kind of concept can be treated as a morphological difference, even if they are very similar otherwise. Some of this, the morphological species, it needs to be tied with biological species concept because it can miss polymorphic species, ones that have a great variation. So this is obviously a sexually dimorphic species. This is the male and the female. Okay, so some of the sexually dimorphic species we talked about before. But if you were just using morphology and ignoring the biological species concept, you might identify these as two separate species because they are different morphologically. Similar, there's something called a cryptic species. These two species, if you just saw them in the wild, literally they're called oak titmouse and juniper titmouse because the oak titmouse, it sits on oaks. Juniper titmouse sits on junipers. That's literally the biggest difference. They have a habitat isolation. And genetically, they are different enough they do not create viable offspring. But they can live near each other. And by just using the morphological species concept and not the biological species concept, you'd think they were the same because literally there's almost no difference. And if you saw these next to each other, you probably identify them as the same species. It was only realized through DNA analysis and recognizing that they never mated or created viable offspring. There's also, unfortunately, with morphological concept, a subjectivity. Sure, bat wings and bird wings are very different, and different enough that we'd say that they're clearly separate species. But when you get close enough to these two species that are very similar looking, how much is different enough to say that this population here is a different species and not just a slightly different morphology? Because if you were to apply this to humans or to dogs, you would probably say, oh, well, these two, in this population, we never have a lighter skin color that appears randomly, so therefore they must be a different species. And the subjectivity, how much difference can there be before speciation happens, is subjective, and people fight about this all the time for geographically isolated species. Which one is a real species? And it's sort of complicated. Obviously, humans are, that was a harder one too. Remember that you have to pair these together. You can't just do one, okay? All right, and the final one, it takes into account morphology, and it also takes into account biology. Phylogenetic species concept is a melding of the two, and what it does is it talks about phylogeny, the actual relationship, and how recent was the split here, okay? It talks about evolutionary history, and it tracks back. Again, next week, we will be talking a lot about evolutionary relationships together, okay? So when you're talking about phylogeny, what you're talking about in terms of species is the smallest monophyletic group, okay? What is a monophyletic group? It means an ancestral population plus all of its descendants, okay? So all of you guys have grandmas, okay? Or had a grandma at some point, okay? You have an ancestor who was your grandmother. And this grandmother, plus all of her children and all of their children, that forms a very small clade, okay? You can use this as relatedness as a family tree of sorts. Usually it's a family tree for species, but you can make a phylogeny for you, okay? And there are different nodes, okay? So at each node is a common ancestor. This common ancestor, this node is your grandma, okay? You have a closer relationship in terms of biology to your mom. And you and your siblings are the same distance from your most recent ancestor, your mom. And so this is one monophyletic group. But note that there's a total of 3 monophyletic groups here. There is your mom and family. There is your aunt and family. And then you all share your grandma and family. Okay? So there's the larger clade, the smaller, 2 smaller clades. Okay? And potentially if this was an actual phylogenetic tree, the smallest version of each one here, these are individuals, but if these were actually different branches on an evolutionary tree, each one of these individuals would be a species, okay? So the phylogenetic species is the smallest of the monophyletic groups. So if you look at it this way, again, they use unique DNA sequences and biology and morphology to all identify where on the tree here. Okay, so you have this elephant. All of these are elephants. And they all share a common ancestor right here. But some of them went this way into Asia. And the Asian elephants have different morphological traits and also DNA sequences that are unique to them, okay? Showing that they diverged before these 2 species did, okay? So this one's much more different than the 2 African species. Asian elephants have 4 different distinct populations that each have a small morphological difference, but there is gene flow between them. and they are not isolated in any way. So they all are the same species. Okay? Again, there's gene flow between all of these, and they can mate with each other. And any morphologies are not species-based. The other branch went into Africa and evolved in Africa, leading to two separate species here. Okay, these are more closely related than they are to the Asian elephants. Note they are only one node away instead of, so these two lead to the same node. Okay, so they're more closely related. But to get to the Indian ones, you have to go, this is one node, two node to get to the Asian ones. So you can see that they're further away, and that's also further away evolutionarily. Again, next week is Lab 9, and that one goes extensively through the phylogeny here. Okay, so unique DNA species, so you can see it's, this is the species. Now the species is the smallest of the phylogenetic groups. There may be different populations that have slight morphological differences, but overall, all three of these are still close enough in DNA that they are able to mate, and they're not isolated from each other. So even if there's populations here, each of these populations have some overlap and are still breeding together. Okay? Does that help you guys understand what the phylogenetic species is telling you about the organisms? Tells you how closely they are related, which ones are different enough to be considered species, and which ones are isolated reproductively. Okay? Again, this will make more sense once you go through the actual activity that we have in Lab 9. So I'm trying to make the labs work with what we're talking about here. We will talk about phylogeny as well next week. All right. So let's talk about relatedness overall. This is a lesson I got from this link down here. If you'd like to go through that in more detail to understand, it does have a lot of good information. So here's a phylogenetic tree of reptiles and birds. Now normally we would think of dinosaurs as reptiles, crocodiles as reptiles, and turtles as reptiles, but not birds. But mostly that's because we're working on morphological traits. We say, well, birds have feathers. These others don't. But it's a little bit more complex than that, because feathers are one morphological feature, but and they're unique to birds. But at the same time, if we look at clades, birds are part of reptile clades. Okay? Any of the groups, the clades, can be formed from one ancestor that's named. Okay? So here we have something called the squamata. Okay? So the lizards and snakes are in the squamata, and they come from this common ancestor. Okay? That also forms crocodiles, non-avian dinosaurs, and birds. But the lizards and snakes went in this direction, and they are the closest related here. But on this branch, some of the reptiles developed shells, and the shelled ones are all on the turtle clade. Okay? And then this whole clade is called Archosauria. And there's a smaller clade here, the Crocodilomorphia, but note that birds are actually in the dinosaur clade, Dinosauria clade. And again, from any one ancestor, one of these nodes is a common ancestor. And the two branches are the directions that they took, sort of. Each one of these will have what's called a synapomorphy at the bottom to identify what's different between that and another one, usually a morphological trait. Okay? Reptiles are not monophyletic, though. When you talk about reptiles, you wouldn't include birds in the reptiles. You'd usually include dinosaurs and crocodiles, though. And so, where do birds come in? This is the key, though, is that understanding that just the morphology of feathers or no feathers doesn't always match. Note that now they think that many dinosaurs had feathers. So perhaps that's the monophyletic group, is you think the crocodiles were reptiles too. But this is the complication, is that crocodiles are pretty far from lizards and snakes, are actually closer to birds in terms of relatedness. So complexities there, right? from the clades, when we look at the individual family groups, we see that dinosaurs aren't actually extinct. Birds are in the Dinosauria clade. Many dinosaurs now are known to have had feathers. This is known from morphological analysis of dinosaur and bird traits. Dinosaurs did not go extinct when the asteroid hit. Instead, the smaller dinosaurs with thicker feather coverings survived better than their larger dinosaur counterparts. And soon, the surviving dinosaurs got smaller, got more feathers, and developed into what we know as birds today. I told my 4-year-old daughter this, and she's been telling everyone who will listen that birds are actually dinosaurs, which is true. So if you ever want to impress someone with your knowledge, just call birds tiny dinosaurs, or talk about having dinosaur for dinner. All right. So at every branch of the tree, and again, you'll get to practice putting these synapomorphies in place. Oh, look at that. Angela owns tiny dinosaurs. I'm assuming, see, it's either parakeets or chickens. It depends on where you live. I don't know if you've seen some chickens, but some chickens look really like velociraptors. Let me see if I feel like this is a good one to show because it's fun to demonstrate. Okay, so let's see. One of those, the fluffy chickens. What are these? Oh, no. Those fluffy chickens. What are these called? Okay, here we go. This is the one I was looking for. Silky. Okay, so I click here. See if I can get to the silky. There we go. Perfect. Okay. Silky chickens are crazy looking. Okay, so here's the silky chickens. They look very much like a dinosaur, I think. They have these very thin feathers, no big feathers like the other kinds of chickens do. And when they're younger, they look very dinosaur-esque, if a dinosaur had a beak. This helps explain a little bit more clearly that birds are more clearly dinosaurs. The way you organize these trees and the way you identify these clades is that each clade has what's called a synapomorphy. It's a trait or a actual thing that identifies that group above that trait as a specific species or as a specific group, okay? So let's say this is the Dinosauria clade here. All the dinosaurs, including birds, share a set of traits. This is one of them. Usually you only use one, but you could put several here that dinosaurs and birds all share. But dinosaurs are not the same as birds. So we have the non-avian dinosaurs over here, and we have the birds over here. And so they are different, but they are all in the same clade, and dinosaurs and birds share many of the same synapomorphies, which are traits. Okay? So these are homologous traits inherited from a common ancestor. They're unique to certain populations or lineages. For instance, a synapomorphy that would identify humans from apes would be our furless skin. Okay? We are on the same track here, okay, as a so we're on the same we are in the same clade as chimpanzees. But if you were to put a synapomorphy on the humans in particular, humans do not have fur on their body. Hair is different than fur, okay? Apes have fur. Many apes are tailless. Some apes walk upright. We have many things that distinguish us from say, monkeys, which are smaller and have tails. But the thing that distinguishes us from the chimpanzee is fur, and also maybe larger brains. Chimpanzees have opposable thumbs too. So I also have this one outlined in your lab 6, okay? But the concept here is that you have the base, all of this whole group of individuals, okay, is part of the vertebrate clade, okay? And then you move up, and sharks are part of the vertebrate clade, but they're not part of the bony skeleton clade. And you move up, and ray-finned fish are part of the bony skeleton clade, but they're not part of the four-limb clade. And then you move up, and amphibians are part of the four-limb, but they don't have amniotic eggs. And you go further and further in. Each one of these primates would have a different synapomorphy here than rodents and rabbits. Obviously, this is not everything that occurs in the mammal segment here, but you could put rodents and rabbits have different teeth shapes. Primates, in particular, so you could, break that down into things. They have these articulated fingers, and then you'd have the monkeys and the primates. And we'd be on the primate side, but sorry, monkeys and the apes, and we'd be on the ape side, but then it would be fur and no fur. Okay. So here is why birds are dinosaurs. They share synapomorphic traits. So these bones that we found of dinosaurs show these connections to these set of air sacs that are unique to birds, and other organisms related to birds do not have them. Okay? And lizards and snakes don't have these either. But these anterior air sacs that are attached to their lungs and posterior air sacs, birds have those too. These are homologous traits that they inherited from their dinosaur ancestors, and they're in the Dinosauria clade. Also, again, many dinosaurs did have feathers. Their feathers were not the more complex ones, say, of a flying bird. And obviously they had jaws and teeth. Birds lost that teeth. There's no toothed birds anymore. But it's an interesting idea here that part of it is the synapomorphy of the air sacs in their bodies that are not shared by many other reptiles like turtles and lizards, because lizards and snakes diverged and existed in the same time frame as dinosaurs, but survived when dinosaurs didn't. Dinosaurs, again, the dinosaurs today are the relatives of the dinosaurs that died out. The smaller, more heavily feathered dinosaurs survived better than those that were larger and had teeth and didn't fly and such. So, interesting concepts here. All right. Last thing I'll cover is kind of understanding that the phylogenetic species concept, it has its pros and cons. And again, it's normally used within the concept of phylogeny versus and biological species concept has to be brought in, and morphologies have to be brought in. The pros of the phylogenetic species concept is you don't have to have living creatures, okay? It applies to any population. It's logical, independent evolution between species. The cons are that there's a limited number of developed phylogenies. We don't actually know every single connection on the phylogenetic tree. We can tell this family is connected to this, but we're not fully sure which one's connected to who and how far back. Because of the way that the synapomorphies work, it can result in more species than other concepts would say, even though we have evidence that biologically they have gene flow between populations. Genetically and phylogenetically, there may be information that says, no, these should be different species. But if biologically they are species, you battle back and forth between these. So here's these concepts. I'm going to skip through this and come back to it. We're going to do some review questions and then be done. Okay, this will take about 5 minutes. I encourage you guys to participate in this. Okay, what we'll do is I want you guys to write it down. Don't answer in the chat right now. Okay. Write it down, and then you can grade yourself and make sure you understand the concepts, okay? But we're going to review the species concepts we covered, okay? So 2 similar species of plants live in the same area. One flowers in June, the other in August. What kind of reproductive isolation is this? So here are your options. Write it down on a piece of paper. Don't put it in the chat right now. Okay, I'm going to give you a second to do that. All right, just put one in like whichever one you think it is. All right, use your knowledge of what words mean and your knowledge of what the other ones are to figure out which one's which. Okay. All right. Second to do that. Okay. The biological species concept can be applied to which of the following? Remember what the biological species concept is. Okay? Remember why maybe you wouldn't be able to apply it to certain individuals. What are the limitations of the biological species concept? Let's write down number 2. And we'll move on. Remember, this one can be multiple, so if you think there's multiples on there that can be applied, then do that. Okay. What distinguishes a morphospecies in the morphospecies concept? What is considered a morphological morphospecies, okay? Remember what we talked about with the morphological species concept. What distinguishes species in that? Different than the biological, different than the phylogenetic. I want a chance to read them all. Reproductive isolation, falciform and distinct time on Earth, DNA sequence, distinctive characteristics. Which one is the correct one? Okay. Remember what I emphasized with what a monophyletic group was. Okay? So make sure you guys understand what a monophyletic group was and which one of these counts as a monophyletic group or a clade. Okay? And why, understanding why some are monophyletic groups and some are not. Only one of these is a single monophyletic group. Finally, a synapomorphy that links bats and birds would be, remember a synapomorphy is a homologous feature that they gained from an ancestor. What would link bats and birds? This one can be tricky. Okay, so think about it for a minute before you write it down. Which one are you sure that they gained? They both have to have it, and they both have to have gained it from a common ancestor. All right. Let's go back. So now please answer in the chat as we move forward. 2 similar species live in the same area. What kind of reproductive isolation is this? All right. A, B, temporal. Okay. It is going to be temporal. Note that I said they live in the same area. There is a spatial geographic one, but it should be the temporal because it's not that they are isolated from each other. Is that temporally, in time, they are isolated. Okay? What about this one? Biological species concept can be applied to which of the following? Okay, so I see A and D, D and A. Okay, so A is for sure yes. The idea is that you can tell for bird species that are alive who is not isolated from each other, and so you can identify them as different species. Note that B would not be true because they're dead ancestors. You cannot tell if they could have mated with their living ancestors. Okay? Dinosaurs, you don't have the knowledge of whether birds could mate with dinosaurs or not because dinosaurs aren't around anymore. Okay? Bacteria, potentially yes. Because bacteria we can observe and they live in the same area, we can observe them sharing genetic information. Bacteria is super weird though, so it's actually hard to identify them because it's hard to see them mating, but still the biological species concept could be used on them. Okay? What distinguishes a morphospecies? Okay, everyone got this one, good. Morphological traits. It has distinctive characteristics like size, shape, coloring. You could say this one, all of them are blue. And in this population, we only see blue individuals. We never see a green one. This green one must be part of a different species. That's the morphospecies concept, especially when they don't overlap geographically and you can't see if they would mate. This would help identify them as different species. Okay? All right, let's see if you guys are listening about the monophyletic groups and clades. Which one of these is one monophyletic group? So it is B. What I always tell people when you're trying to figure out what it is, think about how many times you'd have to cut to get all of the ones that are in this box in there. Note here, chop, one clip, you have a chunk. That chunk is a clade. If you have to snip more than once, there is not one clade in here. You actually have lizards and snakes are one clade. Birds and dinosaurs are one clade. But these together do not make a single clade. It's actually two separate clades, and you'd have to snip twice to get them both together. Similar here, you'd have to snip twice to get these together. If you went down further and you included all of these, then turtles would be part of the same clade as lizards. But you'd have to snip pretty far down. You'd have to snip here to get turtles and snakes together. And you'd have to snip here to get lizards, snakes, and birds together because you have to create it so there's one snip. And so crocodiles would be included in there too. You can't just leave crocodiles out if lizards and snakes are part of it. But I think you guys all have the concept. All right, the hardest one, a synapomorphy that links bats and birds would be Ariana says A. Anyone else have ideas? We have a C, a B, an A. All right. Here's the deal. The ability to fly is too vague. It's not a trait, it's an ability. Note that some birds cannot fly. Note that the ability to fly is vague. Birds, penguins are still birds, but they can't fly. And and the key here is that wings, all of them have wings, but bat and bird wings evolved separately. Bat wings are not homologous with bird wings because bat wings evolved after the development of limbs. This is actually the one. Fortunately, no one answered D. Birds don't have teeth, so at least you figured that out. Note that it should be limbs. The limbs themselves, bats and birds, both have 4 limbs, and that the clear synapomorphy you could clearly cut and say all the ones with limbs or 4 limbs are above here. And birds are part of that. Bats are part of that. Wings developed separately and is not a homology. It is actually an analogous feature, okay? Similar to the squirrels that are placental and squirrels that are amniotic, the other mammals. The placental mammals versus the the mammals that produce, marsupials, okay? The development of the skin flaps to glide in the sugar glider versus the flying squirrel happened at 2 different times, okay? So that would not be a homology. Remember that synapomorphies are always homologous, so it is 4 limbs. That was a tricky one, but try to understand why that is. Ability to fly, it's not applied to all bats and birds. Wings actually evolve separately because it's a mammal versus a bird. And but 4 limbs evolved first before the branching off of mammals, reptiles, and such. Okay? All right, that's all I have. Let's review all of the definitions of them. We'll finish up this speciation on Tuesday, and then we'll move into phylogeny on Thursday, and possibly phylogeny as well on next Tuesday. And you'll also be going through Lab 9, which is heavy into the taxonomy and phylogeny. Okay? You're actually going to be doing that. The exam is open now, Ariana. Okay? So the exam is actively open. And if you don't see it, did you do the honor pledge in that folder? Because it's a separate honor pledge for the exams. Make sure you do that first. Okay. That's most of the reason why people aren't seeing it right now is because they haven't finished the honor pledge in that folder. Do the one in that folder. It's a separate assignment. Once you have one attempt for it, the exam will pop up. Okay? All right. I'm going to stop sharing for now. All right. We have 10 minutes left if anyone has questions about anything exam related. So at 1, we will have, I have office hours. It is, lab 7 and 8 related, but lab 7 and 8 are pretty, are not calculation based. It's mostly 2 activities you're going through and understanding the concepts behind them. So hopefully if you watch the videos that I presented, they won't be too difficult to do. The exam is due tomorrow at 11:59. Not today. Do it today if you can. It's good to get it done early, especially if you have technical issues and I can fix them tomorrow. So you can do it tomorrow. That's up to tomorrow. Available today and tomorrow. Yes, if you open it at 11:59, you can take it. Sorry, I meant to say the concept here is that tomorrow at 11:59, it will close. If you try to take it after midnight, you won't be able to. If you tried to open it at midnight and you just missed the window, send me an email directly at midnight. I'm fine if you take it from 12 to 1:30, but if you try to open exactly at midnight and you missed it, then the key here is that it's open until 11:59 tomorrow night. And if you try to open at 12 midnight, it would not be open. But if you send me an email right then, I'll open it up tomorrow for you. On Saturday for you. But you have to send me an email right then, so I see that you were trying to take it, but you just barely missed the window. Then I'm willing to work with you. Okay. All right. So I meant technically 12 midnight Saturday, but you can feel free to take it. Remember that if you try to open it past 11:59 at night tomorrow, it will not open. If you open it at 11:58, it'll let you have the full hour and a half. You just can't start it before, after 11:59. Okay? No problems if you're a night owl.
I have a suggestion, Professor, because we have a group work, and we had one too, like the last 2 weeks, if you remember, that we had to turn in our group work.
Oh, your group work for the class.
Yeah.
Yeah, so for the report. Yeah, so the
Yeah.
group work is
So
due next week. Yeah.
the thing is, when you put it on the group, we didn't get our numbers, and like I sent the email on the
Okay.
group, nobody answered to me. Is there any way that I can replace my groups? Because I don't think that
Yeah,
I
yeah.
have their con.
If you're unclear about who's in your group, I can absolutely give you that
I had
information.
them
Okay. You're saying you
because
can't
he
get a
was
hold of
sending.
them?
Yeah, I didn't give them. Can you join my group? Is it
Um,
possible?
yeah. I could connect you guys together again. Send an email to all the people in your group and make sure everyone is connected. That's fine. But all the names are there. So if it's just that you aren't sure how to get in contact with them, note that there is a part on. Let me share again, and I'll show you where to find it. Okay. Hold on.
I just send you a text message, chat
Okay,
for
that's
you
fine.
just.
Let me go to my Blackboard and I'll show it to you. Okay. Okay. Well, let's figure it out. Okay. Just send me an email. And we'll talk about that. Okay. Because I'll send me an email. There's no private messaging for this one. I'm not sure. Or
Okay.
no, I guess there's a private message. Okay. We'll talk about it. Okay. But let me show you where to find. Again, don't worry about if there's issues with your group. We'll worry about it after the data collection. Everyone's graded individually for the data collection. If it ends up that we have a couple of groups that are not collecting data as they should, I will merge groups then. But you can collect the data independently and you don't have to talk to anyone, okay? So let's talk directly here about where do you put stuff, okay? So you go to course content. You go to lab materials, lab report, okay? All the links for the data submission are here, okay? So here's your group name, okay? If you click that, it takes you to the spot where you enter your data. That's what next week, that's what's due. Don't worry about everyone else in your group. As long as your initials and your data is there, you're good. Again, if I see that you have, if there's non-participation, or I have a couple, it always happens where I have a couple of groups where like 3 or 4 people drop out and this leaves a very small number. I merge groups after that, okay? So if any merging of groups needs to happen, we'll figure it out from there, okay? But right now, just entering your data, everyone's graded individually. And so just enter
So
your
yeah,
data on the actual Google Doc. You don't have to work with them for this.
do you have actual Google Doc that we can put it? We don't need
Yeah.
to create one.
You don't have to create one, no. Click here. This is your Google Doc. Look, you already have people entering stuff in there, okay? So 2 of your group members have already done it. All right? So just put your name.
Oh, I am ready. I will add it.
Okay. Oh, you've added to this one already? Because I don't see
No,
yours.
I have it in my note. I will add it today. I did not
Okay.
know that I should do it.
Yes, so this is the actual Google Doc. I'll remind everyone where to find this. But this is the Google Docs that you look for, okay? And your name is there, so just put your initials, the names of the types of things that you have here, and then your coverage that are in there, okay?
And so I should go to course content first to find this document. Course content.
So if you look, this is I'm in the laboratory, the lab report folder. So lab materials. It says instructional sheets, Google Docs for data. Okay, so go click on lab report. Go and then it'll have a link and go find the Google Doc. Okay, that's where you.
Yeah, it's here. Thank you so much.
Okay, good. I'm glad. I'm sorry if it was confusing. I did try when I put that your stuff was due. I did link to this to the Google Doc item. So if you go check that announcement, it does have at the bottom when you get to the announcement there. If you're in Blackboard, you can see that I linked to the Google Docs too. Okay.
And we need to put our initial, right?
Yeah, initial. So I see that you entered all your data. And so that gets you the 5 points for doing the actual data collection. And then after the data collection is all done, If I see that there's missing data or the data is incomplete, I'll email individual people and make sure that you get all the data in there properly, okay?
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. All right. Have a good day. And again,
You too, bye.
I'll see people later in the lab if you want to come, okay? All right.